Well, guys, I'm Christina. I think that y'all know me from going to shows and just enjoying music and your past releases and everything. So thank you for taking the time to talk to me. Obviously, I'm not a professional. I'm not a journalist, but I've had a music site forever, so I have written about you guys before. And I know about your music, so I think this is going to be a fun little interview, kind of going over all of your releases and just getting to know you guys as musicians and kind of what the future is for Irreversible as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much. I think, you're kind of like a professional appreciator of our music. So that's why when we thought about doing this, we thought it'd be a great idea to reach out to you. Yeah. So thank you. Should we do intros too?
Yeah.
I'm Billy. I do electronics and vocals and work on the lyrics and the artwork for the band.
Yeah, and I'm Jackob. I do lead vocals, rhythm guitar, some electronic programming, producing stuff sometimes.
And lyrics.
Oh yeah, lyrics too.
Cool. So, we'll kind of focus on obviously your extensive discography, but we can go into anything that y'all want to discuss. When I put together some of these interview questions, I started with Age. Came out in the mid 2000s, but as I was digging deeper, I found out that there was a demo before Age, and I don't know anything about the demo. Because is it even released anywhere? Like, does anybody?
It's a DIY release, so there's probably like 50 CDRs with a Sharpie label in a little paper case or something. It's very rare.
Yeah, because I was gonna say it's not on Bandcamp or anything.
No. I don't even know if we have access to that.
I might have it somewhere, but it's in like. So everything that everyone knows about Irreversible from Bandcamp, for example, is Irreversible 2.0. There's a really short-lived 1.0 of fast D-beat Irreversible. Mm-hmm. Before I joined the band after that stuff had been written and just sort of played along to it. So that's from, I guess, 2005, since Age came out in 2006. Mm-hmm. That was Zach, JJ, CJ, Eric Voss played bass. Yeah. Thomas Pilcher was the vocalist. Yeah. Wow. So that band started in like the hardcore punk scene where like Zach had a band and I had a band where our set would be less than 10 minutes long. It would just be a bunch of, like 8 songs that are less than a minute, just really fast.
Were you in Harsh Fact from the beginning?
Yeah. So me and CJ started this band Harsh Fact together with Tim Hod and Aubrey and Eric. Zach had this band Cold Stare with some members of Instilled, Knife from
Andrew from Foundation.
Yes, fast hardcore punk music. Yeah. I had stopped playing music. Like I went on tour with Creation's End and then played some shows with Fight Like a Brave, then did this thing with Harsh Fact. And I was like, this just sucks. I hate this. It's miserable. You don't get paid. You get like barely enough money to get gas to get to the next place and you sleep on someone's floor. It's just like, even at 16 or 17, I was already like, this sucks. I just want to be comfortable and I hate it. So I sell all my music gear and I'm like, I'm not going to play anymore. And then CJ called me one day. He's like, hey, we have this band you might like. JJ's in it. He plays with the people from Black Paper Diary, Crossbearer, that whole Conyers group of people. I didn't really know JJ. And they were like, you might enjoy this band. It's just new and cool. Zach's playing drums. And me and Billy are from Gwinnett, but lots of hardcore people came from all the different suburbs and met in the city. I'm sure you're familiar with this kind of pattern. Yeah. So you meet people that like you didn't go to school with, they weren't in the neighborhood, but they're like you want to hang out with them and do stuff. So
I think the other piece of that is like you and I were always the younger people hanging out with older people in Gwinnett, and there wasn't anybody else like our age, but JJ, CJ, Zach were all from Marietta and they were like our same age, right? But we didn't really know them. They were like the rivals, like the other version of us.
Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't think about it that way, but they were there and CJ kind of invited me, like, come play with this band. I said, I don't have any gear. He's like, no, we have some gear. Just come like use the gear we have.
Well, you were playing bass then too.
Yeah.
And CJ was playing guitar.
Yes. And I'm pretty sure everyone in the band except maybe Zach was straight edge still. It was like just coming out of.
Didn't know that.
Yeah. But that changed in the end of 2005. I went to see Cave In Nashville, and Stephen Brodsky had a throat problem or something. He was like, I'm hoarse. I can't sing all the falsetto parts tonight. I'm sorry. But they played this amazing set with Torch and Doom Riders. And I saw him after the show. I was like, dude, I loved your set. I thought it was amazing. I hope you feel better. You know, he's like, he said this thing to me. It was like one of those forks in the road in my life where he's like, yeah, my throat would probably heal faster, but like, I just really love marijuana. And I thought like, oh, well, I don't smoke marijuana, but like it's one of my favorite people. So then like throughout 2005 or like the end of 2005, beginning 2006, me and CJ sold out, as they say, you know, like Billy and Zach had already sold out the year before. So like we start, you know, trying stuff. And like that's what made Irreversible 2.0 is we were playing all this fast, short. It was interesting, but just kind of like silly.
Didn't you get asked to join the band specifically to go play that show with some girls that had gotten booked and then Eric quit? Did you play that show?
I did. Yeah. There's some little 240p VHS rip on YouTube of us playing as Irreversible 1.0 with some girls.
Where was that? In Kentucky?
Yeah. So we only like played Southeast stuff. But yeah, so that band changed once CJ and I started getting high with whoever else was getting high, like Billy and Zach. We switched guitar and bass, and then I loved playing with JJ. He was so like interesting of a musician. We had a lot of chemistry together, and then our songs got way longer, way slower, down-tuned, way heavier, and way more dynamic. So that's I don't know how long. That's a really long explanation for how like we got from that little punk phase into the okay, now we're making like atmospheric music, I guess.
Yeah.
The other piece of that then as well is like he said, he started smoking weed, and I was just like really into smoking weed because I was like, I started really smoking weed in college, and then when I had like my own place my sophomore year, which was 05-06, it's like I just got obsessed with smoking weed and being on Wikipedia. And we started hanging out a lot then because I lived right at Ford Factory. So like right across from MJQ and Drunken Unicorn, right across from Masquerade. And like everybody was just always hanging out at my place. And they had started a new version of the band. And I do remember, I guess I can say it at this point, it's like there was kind of like this weird hype because it was like, oh, they're changing their sound and like it's going to be different. I don't even think I had heard it yet. Maybe there was like one like cell phone recording, but like a cell phone recording back then would have been so shitty.
Yeah.
But there was this whole thing of like, oh, we're going to get somebody to play keys and then write. Jacob was like, I've already got these parts written in my head of how it's going to sound. So I remember we were just hanging out one day. We were in that fucking red truck you had, and we went to Guitar Center, the one off 85 when it used to be there. We were just walking around, and I was like, there's a keyboard here that's on sale. I was like, if I buy it, can I be in the band? And he was like, hold on. He like went and texted somebody. While he was doing that, I went and called my mom. And I was like, listen, I'm putting this on my credit card. Don't get mad. Don't freak out.
I didn't know this.
Yeah. And I bought this used keyboard that was missing a knob. So the whole time I had it in this the whole first phase when I was in the band, it had this like tiny key from like a login that I had to use to make this keyboard function. So that was how I bought my way into the band.
Yeah. All the change in sound didn't divorce itself from the DIY, trashy, shitty, broke, cheap, punk elements of our just way of living. Everything was just, we all had no job, restaurant job or manual labor job, or we were in school, like getting some help from family. I remember I couldn't live in the city because I was just like bagging groceries or doing landscaping or something. And Billy was in school, Zach was in school, and I would like just stay with them. I just kind of lived on their floor or couch at different periods.
Or you would just stay at Thunderbox.
Yeah, right. Sleep in the practice space. Yeah. That was just our way of being like, okay, everything that matters is happening in the city. Everything that's out there is just repetitive and annoying. So we had to like get together and do something interesting. And once CJ and I kind of got with this different way of, like everyone we went to school with would get drunk and they do this thing that they do, but like getting high was different because it meant you could appreciate things that people had created without all this context about what's wrong or acceptable. You like that wasn't there. You're just like, hey, some people make crazy shit. Let's check it out. Like, oh, this scares me, or this makes me react this way. We wanted all of that in our music. Yeah. So like you try to pay homage to your punk origin. Like we did that with Thorn, I feel like, but throughout it all, it's like, it's a much bigger space where a lot more is allowed in the space because people are just, you know, you're not thinking the way you're normally thinking. We just tried all kinds of weird shit to try and make it interesting.
Yeah. And I think even what you're saying is just like, I still think like, and we can still talk about Age too, but it's like Age was like still like the breaking out of that, because I remember, I think it was David who said like, when you first heard Age, he's like, yeah, it sounds like Further Seems Forever, like on weed.
Yeah. So people said, oh, you guys sound like Hope's Fall. I was like, God damn it. We're not trying to be like a metalcore band, but Age is a kind of metalcore album. It has some.
Yeah. Like JJ's leads are very metalcore.
Yeah.
So are yours. Yeah. But that's what's, I don't know. Yeah.
Age has a naivete about, we don't know what this band is or what we're doing with it. Let's just make some noise in this direction. And that's like what it ended up with. Yeah. Did you have some questions about it specifically?
Well, yeah. I mean, I kind of wanted to, you know, talk about kind of my interpretation too. Because what I noticed in a lot of your music is the contrast of like cinematic and kind of, you know, moving parts into just heaviness. And you use a lot of like samples in a lot of your music. And even in Age, you know, as an example, the intermission goes from like a baby crying to like intense vocals. And, you know, so things that I've noticed, you know, throughout that album. Also, it's interesting that you're talking about, I guess, weed influencing your music. I mean, I think it's apparent in the music that you make, but it's something that I didn't even think about, you know, because I don't partake, but I like Irreversible's music because it makes you feel something, and it turns into something different. Like every turn.
I think you hit the nail on the head, and that's like especially, I think that was a big part of me when you joined the band was like, yeah, the whole Age is made up of all samples from the movie Irreversible by Gaspar Noé, and like that middle sample is actually like, there's like a very infamous like rape scene in the movie, and that's what's sampled there. But like, I think that's me and Zach. That was when we first met. That's how we became like really, really good friends. Is we both loved movies, and we were just like, obsessed with movies. And then I think even to Jacob's point of like, that's like a big part of just like the art was just like that connection. And Liz Harris that does Grouper as her project, she talks about like she sees the music she makes as like a room. And I really relate to that. And that's what you were saying is like, I feel like we've never talked about this. It's like we've always constructed these like, kind of like you're saying, is like there's this propulsive energy to all of it, and it feels like a film where things are constantly moving forward and evolving, and one element gets added in that kind of changes the dynamic, and others get pulled out, and then they come back later and you hear them in a new way. And of course I'm wearing this shirt as I say this, but I feel like David Lynch was like a huge influence for like the three of us, especially me, Zach, and Jackob, of like just this like, again, just like an alternative way to do things. Like his movies are so anti-movie in some parts, so like that's always been a big influence. Is just the whole idea of these songs being like these little cinematic experiences that take you on this journey. That's why I feel like that's why it made sense to bring you into the band, because playing when you have just traditional guitar, bass, drums, vocal stuff, your band's limited in certain ways. Some bands pull it off great, like Coldplay or Gin Blossoms do that, but when you bring in like another element, like electronically, I always wanted to keep it away from being a prog rock thing where, let's bring in someone to like wail on the keys. And no, it was more like just garnish the spaces in between the heavy parts with something to make it. Are you laughing about garnish? Yeah.
Sorry. But he's doing things that just like make the songs link to each other. And we were big fans of Old Man Gloom from the beginning. So listening to them, like, when you put on an Old Man Gloom record, there's no silence unless it's like a song just is about to start. So that was like an amazing thing. If you get high and listen to a record, it's really cool that the record is never going to let you stray your attention elsewhere. It's just going to be like, I'm always here making some kind of sound. And whatever that sound would be would have something to do with some weird, obscure movie or sample thing that we came up with. So Age had all samples from the movie. The titles of the songs.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask next.
Yeah, they're
what
lazy.
Was the significance of the numbers?
They're lazy titles. So basically, if you watch the movie Irreversible, it's a series of events happening backwards. Okay. And the titles are basically like the first track is dash dash colon dash dash, which is what you would just see on like a DVD player on stop or at zero mode. So going from there to the numbers, they're just the remainder of time left on the album. They don't.
Okay.
So they don't matter. They're
essentially like a countdown.
Yeah. Okay, so 24, 33, 13, 42, 8, 22.
The last song is just the length of that song as its title. And the one before that, just that plus.
That's right.
Yeah. So
that's taken from the movie, the DVD. I believe the chapters on the DVD titles are the same way. Like it's just a countdown from the start of the movie to the end.
Yeah. And I think it's weird because when you go from not having it, like, hardcore punk music is cool and energetic, but it doesn't have this deep insight inside of it like you get from other, like I feel more insight coming from Pink Floyd or some major band than I would from like a hardcore band. That was more of a social connection thing for me that was special, not the music itself. But with our music, I feel like we wanted to pay homage to these people who did these things that we appreciated. So just like ripping off that time pattern, for example, from the movie, didn't feel like, oh, we're cheating and trying to be cool by doing something someone else did. It was like, no, we love this person. Like, please pay attention to this person. We think they're cool. And all the samples are in there kind of in that way. And doing that made it easier. So it's partially paying homage, partially like scared laziness, where if we don't have to think about the titles much or the lyrics, like the lyrics followed a very specific formula that made it really easy for me to write.
Okay.
And JJ and I, going into the studio, what we thought would happen is me and JJ would both play guitar and both do vocals because neither of us had done vocals before. And it was like this pact where, man, I don't want to be like the dude who has to scream all the time. And like, what if my voice goes out? I ruin the show. That's happened to our band before because of me being sick. Like, what I don't feel comfortable. I want you to do everything with me. So we go in there and I just happened to go first and we recorded my vocals and kind of listened to it and was like, oh, this just sounds the way it should sound. Like, just maybe you want to do some backup vocals. You'll be the lead guitar and I'll be the rhythm guitar. And I'm like, okay. But we were very nervous about like, okay, we can write some stuff. We don't have our singer anymore that we used to have who's in charge of all that. What do you say? What are people supposed to do with their band? Like we have all this energy and feeling, but where do you put it? That was made easier by following some formulas and little, homages to the people who influenced us. So we didn't really have to, it could be references to those things instead of just like, here we are, this new band, and we have all this stuff figured out that we want to say. It's like, not really, just there's other stuff that.
When a lot of the lyrics are just from the film as well, like, time destroys all things. Although I think I was just looking at it recently and it's like, that's not the right translation, but
it's French. So it may not be that.
And then like even, I don't remember what I was going to say, but yeah.
Well, you say lazy, but I think of it as intentional. Even if it was something that you thought was just easy, I think that it's good because it had intent. So in the beginning, you did a lot of like the recording, like you, Jackob, or like who did the recording and the producing in the beginning?
The first two albums, so Age and Sins, were both produced and engineered by Matt Washburn.
Okay.
He used to live where?
He was in Canton around CJ and JJ. So they knew each other.
He was up in that
JJ's
area.
brother had recorded there.
But he's since moved and now he lives like in even further north Georgia. Yeah. But he had done like the first Mastodon album. So we knew he would get it. And he did. I mean, he's a drummer, so like the drums and the bass are all super loud on those first two. But I mean, I think, again, just to the whole, especially Sins, we had a lot more ideas going into the studio. Because
people received Age really well. Like I remember people coming up, oh, I love this I just love how this busts in from like quiet parts to really loud parts. So that just feels good. I don't know anything about this genre. I'm like, I don't really know anything about it either. Like we knew Pelican and Yezu and Godflesh and a couple of Hydra headbands, but we were sort of catching up on listening to this music that had been around for at least a decade as we just started writing it.
Yeah, that's the thing that's always funny to note is like nobody knew like when Age was written, like none of us, had started listening to Old Man Gloom, and like that's what we were listening to in Cave-In, but like we didn't like love Neurosis, we didn't love Isis, we didn't like know who Cult of Luna was when we wrote all that shit. But even then it was funny because I remember like I've always been like just super omnivorous in my musical taste. So like I remember like we went to record Sins. I was like, have y'all ever heard My Bloody Valentine? Like let's listen to this on the way up there. And it was like same thing. I was like, are y'all into Roxy music? Do you know who Brian Eno is? Like let's have like just the keyboard playing one fucking note this whole time. And like that'll be the vibe. So yeah, I think again like we went in with a lot more ideas to do Sins, and Matt was like super eager to try stuff with us. And he was always super open to our weird ideas, and he would always just like try it, and he would maybe like make fun of us for a second. But those records I think came out sounding awesome, incredible. And I was glad we worked with him. And then for the later albums, he like, he did a lot of just like the recording and like capturing, and then we would go back and mix and master and do all that ourselves.
Got you.
And even to varying degrees.
Yeah. It's interesting because I noted that there was a huge progression to me between Ages and Sins. It seemed like you worked with Matt, right, on both of them, but I could tell the difference in artistry going from Ages to Sins. And what else I noted was that it was similar to Ages in the contrast of like melancholy moments and like heavy buildups. But to me, it filmed more like, or it flowed more like a film soundtrack to me. And a lot of songs there are sound clips used, which adds to the listening experience. And we've kind of talked about the samples in the prior. But what else about Sins, makes it like such a like full release?
That was the thing is, so Age came out, it was just written as like an idea, as just this piece. And then we started doing other things, like we were going to do a 10-inch or like a single or something. We started writing the song Sins, the title track. And then I can't remember what changed it, but somewhere along the way, we're like, this is going to be like a full album. And I remember at that point, me and Jackob literally kind of set the intention of like, okay, we're going to write this like a double LP, and we're going to plan this out and have this flow. And also like importantly, like make sure it's going to fit on the sides of a record the way we want it to. So
wow.
Yeah, that dictated that is like the whole foundation of everything else that followed. It was, we want a double LP.
Wow.
Like, that matters. Because I didn't.
And it took 16 years for it to come out.
I was going to say, it was never released.
I didn't collect vinyl, but like he tried to corrupt me. He's like, take this Cave-In record, or like, look, check out this double LP I have. And you're hanging out. Oh my God. I love like physical media. Yes. It's beautiful. It's not like a hipster thing. I want to hold and look at this, and it's just like special and cool. So thinking about it like that made it matter where the big short songs, samples, noise tracks were. That dictated a lot of it.
Is that the first album where we used a spreadsheet? Did we use one on that, or did we just all have it in our heads?
I've been using spreadsheets since I was making my Christmas list as a 10-year-old.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, like, I think that was the first record we introduced, and this is all just from Jackob being neurotic at the time, and now that I'm like a grown-up professional, I realize how necessary it is. But like, yeah, we literally had a spreadsheet. We were like, okay, we're going to have, the middle song is going to be Sins, and the first thing we wrote after we played the first show for Age, and we just played Age straight through. And then we came to practice the next day, and we wrote Tambora. So that was the first song that we had. Yep. So we just started piecing from there, and we were like, okay, we're going to write a fast, heavy song. And then like, that was the prompt. So, I've always loved like reality TV challenges, like Project Runway is one of my favorite shows. So like, that's something that I've always taken from this is like, when creativity is boundless. You can go anywhere. And if you let yourself explore forever, you can get lost in the woods. So like we started creating these boundaries for what we were doing to help contain the creativity. And that was literally just the framework for Sins, was like, we want this to be a double LP, and you'll flip the record for this song. And then, what is the actual title for, And Beyond the Infinite. Like we're like, okay, that's going to be, you flip it over and you go to that. So
really that's the disc switch. Because you flip it over and then have to go to like the CD sides.
Right.
The samples and the lyrics and really just like this faux theme that I had created in my head are all just like about just the kind of obvious metaphor of like Satan as the light bringer, Lucifer, the truth bearer. And it's just like, all of them are just different cultural references. The first one is a YouTube video. Again, like I was just obsessed with being online back then, and like early days of Wikipedia and just like early days of YouTube. I can remember I was going to Georgia State, and I would just go to the computer lab between my class and look up weird shit and text Jackob about it. Like, have you ever heard of Time Wave Zero? And then, so that's an example. Like the YouTube video is like, it's an Islamic exorcism. So that's the first sample in Tambora. Then there's a sample from this film called God Told Me To, or Demon, that's starring, the other piece of when we were writing this, I was also sure we were going to get super famous. So I wanted to use all samples that were in like the public domain. So that's why we didn't sample a lot of big movies. So the other one, Demon, has Andy Kaufman in it. And I just found it from a list of movies in the public domain. And Jackob was obsessed with Man on the Moon, Jim Carrey, Andy Kaufman, Tony Clifton especially. So that was why we included that. But the movie's about like this god alien that possesses people and makes them kill people. What else? Then we did a spoken word from Dante's Inferno, the inscription over the gates of hell, because the whole song is based on that. So, and then what's after that? The reading from the Satanic Bible by Colt. It was Colt, obvious as well. I think that's the other thing, and I talk about this in the zine, was like part of the energy, I think, of Sins and why it was so good is because, how old were we? We were like 20 years old. So there was just this and again, we were smoking weed for like the first time independently in our lives. And I really thought like we were breaking new ground by doing a lot of things like, oh shit, we're quoting from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Like, no one's ever heard of this. And like, I genuinely thought that shit. Like, and I think again, that's what it takes, is just like, that's the energy that's infused in it. Is like, even if we weren't totally breaking new ground, we weren't letting ourselves be cut off to ideas that other people had done. So again, like now I would probably never do a reading from the Satanic Bible, because I mean, maybe that just feels a little bit obvious to me, but at the time it was just perfect. And we were so pleased with ourselves for doing that.
Yeah, it had a different, it was punk, not in a kind of social way, but it was punk in like a philosophical way where things are not good because they're alternative and a different twist on what should be done, like in the physical world. It's like, no, this is, your brain should be going other places. That was a cool, dissident idea that we were really obsessed with.
Well, I think also, again, just important context is like we were both raised in Gwinnett County, just like ultra rich, white, conservative, Christian. And like,
I cut the grass, man. I wasn't rich.
I'm not saying you were. I'm just saying like that's the class of people that are really there. Yeah. And I just feel like, especially younger, like, being into skateboarding and Bush was enough for like some parents in my neighborhood to think I was a bad person and like tell their kids they couldn't hang out with me. And it's like, again, like that is so funny to think of that now, but like at the time that was just the context we were raised in. Again, I was in a very rich white neighborhood. So like that was like inappropriate behavior. So again, I think we were just like very coming out of that context and doing whatever we could to push the opposite and just say like, all of that is bullshit. Here's this other set of things.
Yeah. Skateboarding made that possible for me, because it was like, if you skateboarded and then Tony Hawk came out and you heard the soundtrack and you realized there were bands on that, that was like how I realized underground music existed. I said, why haven't I heard this on 99X or 96 Rock or the radio stations? Like, and there was no YouTube. There was like the box where you watch music videos of the shit you heard on the radio. So just hearing like underground music, I was like, oh, this exists. Holy shit. Like these bands are like my son and I, we listen to all kinds of music that's just from that time period and genre set of just punk and faster, weirder versions of pop songs that you wouldn't be able to play on the radio for whatever random reason. It's just like the gateway drug thing. You get into skateboarding, you get into punk and metal, then you can, there's a lot of weird stuff.
It's the same thing. And then like Anton LaVey, like you read about that and then you find out about cooler people like Austin Osman Spar by like delving further. They're all just like that first layer that has to get you in. You can get into the true underground stream.
That's what I wrote in the zine about the LaVeyan thing is I'm not allergic to the Satanic Bible, but I feel like that's just the pop culture representation of all the weird subcultures and groups that care about,
that's what's bubbled up to the surface.
Yeah. So it's not like I'm not ashamed of it, but I just kind of wish I knew then what I knew now because I've read so many more books and stuff. But it's cool. It's if people can resonate with the music at least, that means like, okay, we were onto something that was good enough for people to care about and they could feel what we were feeling.
I grew up in the suburbs in like North Georgia. So it was very small town, conservative, no culture. So how I found music was by getting out of that town, moving to Atlanta, and really just, it kind of opened my eyes to all kinds of genres of music. So now I listen to everything. But something that I'll mention later, but your music isn't something that just like the normal listener or, somebody who's just going to easily listen to music. It makes you think. That's just my interpretation of Irreversible. And that's kind of what I gravitate towards too. And like metal. I mean, it's just my favorite. I also skateboarded, which you never would think. But that opened my eyes to a lot of different culture as well.
I remember like getting the first Trans World magazine. Same thing you're talking about. I was like, oh, there's all these reviews of bands I've never heard of. And like all these other skate videos that I didn't know existed. Yeah,
there were other little gateway drugs too. Like I would go to the Mall of Georgia, Sam Goody, and get the Epitaph Punkorama straight out of the Pit 4 thing. And it's like, okay, well, Tom Waits is on here, and I've probably seen a music video of his, but I don't know who he was. Lagwagon or like Millencolin. What are these weird bands? And then they would have things like Warped Tour, So you've got some bands you've seen on MTV, and then some weird people who are these other weird people making weird music. Yeah.
So getting back to Sins and the intention of it being a double LP. So fast forward to 15-ish years later, how did the release, the actual physical release of Sins happen? Did Dipterid Records reach out to you guys, or did you have a relationship with this label to do this release?
So Brandon Boyle, who books all the best shows, he's got Facebook. I haven't had Facebook in a long time, but someone on there reached out to him and said, who are the people in Irreversible? I might want to talk to them about releasing their material physically. And Brandon sent me a message, like a text message saying, hey, do you know who this person is? Do you want to do this? I was like, wait, like he wants to fund and handle it? Like I've been thinking about, funding it if I get bored one day, like maybe I could afford it now, but this guy will actually press it and manage it and deal with it all. That sounds really cool. Wow. And I'm pretty sure the next person I talk to is Billy, because I don't know anything about, designing something physical, and managing that. And then we were like, okay, let's talk about that. And I lived in Seattle for 5 years, but I came back, and that's one of the things that we started talking about as I moved back here and we started hanging out again. It was like, okay, let's try to put out this record. And if someone else is in charge of it, like, how could I possibly say no? We wanted this for a long time. This feels really something I'm really grateful for. And the LP looks amazing. It looks like we hoped it would look a long time ago.
I meant to tell you to bring yours. I still haven't seen one. Yeah. So Kevin is the guy who runs the label, and he's been awesome. I have talked with him a lot for the last year. I kind of took the lead on working with him as like for the creative direction, artistic direction. We had unfortunately, we couldn't find the original art files.
Okay.
Also, if anyone doesn't know, we pressed the CD once 1,000 copies, and I did all the art and layout by myself and spelled the name of the band wrong on the CD spine. So that's awesome. But all the photos are by Zach, our drummer. He went on a trip to Spain and Paris, I think like the summer before we did it. So like 2004, 2005, sometime in there. He took all the photos and I laid them out. I was really into typography at the time and spent a lot of time doing that whole layout, which unfortunately we didn't get to reuse for the booklet, but we used some of my favorite art for that. But yeah, he's been awesome. He's been so supportive. Like Jacob said, he's done all of the worst work to get it all done and make it happen and ship them all out. So, I mean, forever supportive to him. Hopefully, you know, he's talking about maybe doing Age next, so that would be cool. And then look at some of the other releases. We need to get those all on Spotify because they're not on there because we don't know how to get them on there.
DistroKid, maybe? Is that still a thing?
Yeah, and there's also, you know, Gavin, who does Stick Figure, helps people do that, so we might reach out to him.
Yeah.
But yeah, back to what Jacob was saying, Brandon was kind of the person who got it on our radar, and he's also got the band back together when we got back together to do Ashes. He was kind of the impetus for all of that, and he
oh my god, I forgot that was part of that. Yeah.
Oh really? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also we had said we pretty much probably weren't going to play a show around all of this, and like we had all kind of resigned ourselves to that. And then he asked us to play the GODFLESH show, which we obviously could not say no to that. So yeah, shout out Brandon, shout out Speakeasy. He's been a huge supporter and promoter and proponent of this band for a very long time. And yeah, we would not have probably gotten back together, and we would not be playing with fucking GODFLESH if it was not for him.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon.
How do you feel about the response to the release of the album? Like, it's selling out.
Yeah, that was a very good feeling for me. I spent a lot of time in putting the whole pre-order package together. We got those patches made locally, the shirts printed locally, and then the zine I did all by hand. Me and Jacob spent a day going through just like a huge catalog of images that we had saved from back then, and then just other stuff that we were into that inspired us, and collected all those. And yeah, I spent like 2 days tearing everything up by hand and putting it all together, and then fighting for my life trying to pass that massive tome through a photocopier. Took a lot of tries, but yeah, all worth it. It's been really great. We've had a lot of people reaching out, especially to say that like the visual presentation has been great, which is, you know, always been, I think, like a huge part of it for me. For any band that I love, I'm just a huge fan of art in general. And so putting that together felt good. Again, as we've talked about, is like, it had been an idea since we were writing the songs, even before the album came out. So yeah, that moment to see, well, I still haven't seen it yet, but when I get to see one.
He made fun of me for ordering one, and I was ordering it for two reasons. One, I wanted to just get it as quickly as possible, which I accomplished. And I wanted to QA, like quality assure the whole, like, what does it look like if I'm someone shopping, and I'm like a computer programmer. So I think, what happens if I go and like use the website? Will I get everything, and will it be perfect? And it was. It was like the corners of the vinyl are preserved in this nice box with the shirt and the zine in there. I'm like, yes, this is how it should.
I loved the patch too. I thought that was really nice.
That's an old design from some flyer or something you did.
It wasn't even a flyer. That's my favorite. Well, and that's what feels great about the whole thing is, that's like a design that just existed. I don't even have it on a computer anymore. So Jacob had that saved away, thank God, on some drive, on a drive. So yeah, I made that back in the day. It's based on just a NASA actual space exploration patch. So yeah, I was really stoked on that. Tulip Cake Embroidery did that for us. Shout out Tulip Cake.
Shout out.
But yeah, I think that was another, I mean, we kind of touched on this. It's just like, at the time when we had come out of being this hardcore punk band, that was like kind of our biggest declaration is like, we do drugs now. And like, I think that was like really good marketing, because then people thought we had like serious drug problems and like thought we were on like hard drugs,
like powders and street drugs.
Yeah, but like we were actually just like taking too many bong rips before we played, and just like taking mushrooms every third weekend and taking acid. But yeah, I mean, that was just the claim that we took after. And I remember specifically we played, what show was that? The second show that we played, after we played that show that was all age, we wrote Tambour, and then we went to our next show and opened with it. And that's another thing I do remember. It was just like, we were still a newer band, and it was an all hardcore benefit show. I think it was the Instilled reunion show.
Yeah, all fast bands.
And we were like the second or third band on. And I remember we got out there and we just fucking absolutely blew everybody's heads off, because like
we were playing full stacks. It was louder than all the bands combined.
We were loud as fuck. We were also just really tight at the time too. Like we were practicing all the time.
Yeah.
And like between songs, Jackob said something about us not being a hardcore band. And then like, I remember specifically someone came up to him and was like, hey, why did you say that?
Somebody else, I saw somebody outside, I won't mention his name, but I asked, did you catch my new band? He was like, yeah, I did, but like you started playing, it was just too loud. He walked out. I was like, all right, fuck that, dude.
Wow.
Success.
Yeah, but being loud was cool. Like I saw Red Sparrows live, who's not particularly loud, but I mean, just like getting hit right up front from loud-ish amps is like a new thing. It was more than hardcore bands playing medium volume.
What was that show? It was Torch and Red Sparrows that you saw. That's funny. We didn't touch on that. And I kind of always forget about them because they kind of drifted off. But like Red Sparrows was a huge band that we got really into, especially during the writing of Sins. And then we got to open for them in Kai Lessa.
Oh, yes. That was
where was that at?
Drunken Unicorn. I think like...
What year was that?
2007.
Okay, it was before I moved to Atlanta.
To that era, that was like the biggest show we ever played, to the most people with the biggest bands.
Wow.
Yeah, that felt important. Like, wow,
That's
we
great.
admire these people. And
we played really well. We were very tight at the time.
Like our internal social environment was different going from Age to Sins, because I feel like with Age, we were really excited and let's do this new thing. And then once it came out, it's like, all right, there's some energy building, but now how do we not diffuse it and take it in the right direction? And I think everyone in the band, besides like me and maybe JJ, kept saying, you know, last time you guys each brought your own riffs. Why don't you guys sit down and play guitar together and write these riffs? And I was never into that. I didn't think about it that way. All the bands I'd been in before, someone brings something and you play your part, and that's just what you do. So especially, I remember Zach was like, why don't you guys like just like do something, just playing? And we never really got around to it, or we would try it and it didn't work at the Sins 2006-07 era. But I remember as we did more like, you know, mushrooms and acid and hung out together, sometimes we would just go to Thunderbox and like turn the lights out and turn the amps on and like make noise. And it's not noise anybody would want to buy a record of unless you're in like Sun and Earth and stuff. But out of some of that stuff came some of the newer things that eventually became, you know, new riffs and ideas. So it took us like connecting just in that social space before it was an easier thing to do to write together, I guess.
Well, that's something that I talk about in the zine as well, is like, there was kind of this, and it wasn't even like, there was no animosity, but there was like this slight rivalry of like, me and Jackob were writing a lot together and we would go up and do shit. And then JJ just had a lot of ideas, and CJ was involved in those, but like JJ had a lot of stuff in his head that none of us had ever heard. And then we got to the studio and it was like, I remember some parts I was like, what the fuck is this dude doing?
Yeah, he's done 3, 4, 5 takes. It's all him. He's just doing these on top of
He was just layering it, single notes with the EBO on top of itself. And then I remember like stacked it all that we heard. And I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, he knew. He's prolific and just organized in his mind about writing.
And that's the thing, is like both ends of Sins. There's Heavy Bones first.
Yeah. Heavy Bones before Sins.
And like, again, that was like all him. He had just made that all up in his head, including the vocals. And I remember again, like we're kind of giggling as he was recording it in the studio, just like being little assholes. And then, once I heard it all on top of each other, it was just genius. And it definitely added his, like, something we haven't talked about. It's just like the unspoken, hugely emo influence of this band is a lot from JJ, but also, I mean, you write lots of sad bastard shit too. So like, I think that's something that's allowed us to stand out as well. And I think kind of what you've picked on is just like that heavy emotional aspect. And me and JJ were both always into, you know, like Envy, the Japanese screamo band. And we all pretty much love like Appleseed Cast and all that Deep Elm type of shit. And I think it's always had a big influence in our writing and just a lot of the vibes of the band.
I've always liked bands, not always, now it's kind of uncomfortable to listen to, but I remember liking screamo-ish bands like 1/5, I Have Dreams, a lot of those bands that would just have, screeching D-beat breakdown stuff. And then they would have like just some really pretty, almost, you could tell someone it was a Christian music worship song or something, and they would believe you because it had all those like heartstring pulling chords, but it was recorded in a shitty way with shitty amps and cheap, shitty guitars and someone who didn't really play it the same way every time. So like, I always love the idea of just stretching those things out, and hopefully it wouldn't come across too conflicting, like, because when you listen to that stuff now, you're like, why is this dude just absolutely shrieking? And then it sounds like they're crying. Like they haven't made up their mind about what they're doing, but it still felt good to listen to at the time. And like when you try to,
well, I'm a Gemini, so I always loved that shit.
Oh,
the conflicting things. And I think that's where our personalities have meshed, is like you temper that out so it's not quite as jarring.
Yeah. I want it to make sense and sound like the same band still.
And I think that's the other cinematic aspect of it too, is like it has that emotional quality that conveys through the lyrics and the vocal delivery along with the music.
Yeah. Sins has that emotional quality, I think, because either getting terrified on weight, you do too much mushrooms or acid, you get scared, or you have like your first major breakup or first child, whatever's going on, like it will like just squeeze out of you real feelings. So if you're, it's amazing how, and I don't think it had anything to do with like deciding to form the band, made all that stuff show up. It's more like getting out of your teens and into your 20s, like you start experiencing legitimate forms of suffering. Like you've always been protected, and now like this is what suffering is. And if there's all kinds of ways to cope and deal with it and try to make it right. But like, if you're just a person, like a nerd like us, reading Wikipedia and books and watching weird films, like this is how you do it. You try to encode it in a way that's repeatable, and you can listen to it and remember that time or relate it.
I think that's what kind of resonated with me when I first started listening to you guys, because I was going through a lot of depression and anxiety when I first moved to Atlanta, not knowing anybody, or so I turned to music even before I moved to Atlanta, but I always turned to music to feel something, but also relate. So that kind of pulled some of that heaviness that I was feeling. I could relate to that in the music. So it's powerful.
Yeah, it's a good relating tool. I mean, when people make music that sounds the way that I'm feeling when I listen to it, it's wow, that's amazing that could happen.
Yeah, it's music is so important to me. All right, well, we'll move on to Light if you want.
Sure.
Okay, Light.
I have nothing to say. I got kicked out of the band before this album was recorded.
No. Side note.
It's okay. I was there for some of the writing and then around for most of the recording.
All right. Well, so it's meant to be an experience. We know this. As outlined in the liner notes, I noticed that it said an audible trip around the circle of fifths. All 12 major keys are demonstrated throughout on rotation of the 64-minute movement. Now, I don't know much about music theory, so I did some research. And this type of composition, like just from my research, looking at Wikipedia, it was developed in the 1600s. And it's used a lot in classical work, but it also mentioned how it's in modern music too. I mean, I think it mentioned like some Beatles songs or something like that. But it says in practice, these compositions are rarely used. They rarely use the entire circle of fifths.
Yeah.
So, like, I mean, that seems like that would be super challenging to accomplish.
It's so funny because that just came up as we've been relearning the songs and helping Johnny learn them. This just came up because, like, there's songs on Sins where it's like, oh, yeah, I'm only playing like 3 notes.
CJ says that. He's like, I'm playing open every single part so much. Like that's part of what created that. So, the way he said, you think about it like a record. I thought about Light like a record. Okay, let's do another big release. And the more like the mushrooms went to LSD to DMT, like things started to get supercharged, where I remember having practices where there would be like a whiteboard with, all these different geometric shapes on it and numbers. And I'm trying to explain how we're going to do this circle of fifths thing in this certain amount of time. And because I was pissed, I was like, I don't like that when you hear some chord, you're like, oh, is this irreversible song or this irreversible song? Like that's just there's not enough variety or diversity in the spectrum of what we're doing. So we have to like up our skill level. I was really big on that. I the best I've ever played guitar was in like 2003 and 4, and I've never been as good since. I tried to like get back into, making stuff work. And JJ and I finally got to the point where we would sit down and play stuff like together. And
y'all wrote a lot on acoustic for that record, didn't you?
Yes. It took years to get this out. So like Sins came out October 2007. This didn't come out till 2009 or so. And during this time, me, Zach, and
I cannot believe that was only 2 years.
Yeah. Me, Zach, and Spencer had like moved to Oregon and back one summer in 2008. And we kept iterating on this stuff. JJ at this point had sort of moved out of the city with his family. He was raising his first child. And we get back together and keep writing and stuff. And I kept thinking like,
side note, we started writing Ashes in between as a different song. Aborted it.
Yes. Ashes didn't become a thing yet. It kind of just stayed on ice for a while, but we tried to write Light. And at the beginning I thought, okay, I'm the only one who's just unhinged enough to think about all these geometric patterns we can encode so that when people do the drugs we did, they'll get the secret message that the UFO gave us or whatever it was, So, but I'm thinking that's just me, right? But JJ comes to practice one day and he's like he's working at Office Depot, and I think he has this uniform on. He like reaches in his khakis and pulls out this paper. He's like, all right, so here's what I'm thinking. And it's this fucking spreadsheet with like color-coded cells and numbers. And it's basically the breakdown in the song Resonance. It's just, and Zach's always like Meshuggah, like mathy, heavy, dark stuff like that. So JJ joins me in this unhinged, like turbocharged Asperger's insanity. Let's just make all the like math we can fit into this shit fit. Yeah. So basically every song is like in a different key. And sometimes we use different tunings to accomplish that. But as you go from one to the other song, there's a rule where you only play these 12 notes, then it's these 12 and these and these and these. When you get to the end of the album, if it's on repeat, it will just sound like the whole thing starts seamlessly. Wow. In terms of, what did you ask? Was it challenging?
Uncomfortable. Yeah, was it uncomfortable? Because you're having to think of every single note.
No, it made sense for me. It was like a technical exercise, like you said. And being challenged with solving problems that I'm working on by myself that involve patterns or numbers, I'm just very comfortable there. So it just made sense to work like that. And then it was fun. Like JJ would be like, his hands are like the size of mine, but he's shorter than me. So he'll play these notes and be like, look at this chord. Like, this is what we're playing here. It's this. And it's like, holy shit, that's just obnoxious. Why do you write stuff that's so difficult? And we had this thing where he would bring something new and we just laugh at how hard it was to play, but we just do it over and over again until it sounds perfect. And all the musical execution is there. But I think we all tried to become like 90s alternative singers in the studio and make it make sense. But our voices don't sound right. Like we made the notes right, but the timbre and the harmony and stuff, we didn't really know what we were doing. I think a lot of that was me hiding behind Spencer as a person who had sang in a band before. Maybe like, oh yeah, I could like do this too. But it's kind of disappointing to listen to in that respect, but just all the memories of making that music are in there. And some people have had really good responses to it. This one dude wrote this giant like exegesis of what all the songs mean. He actually understood the download that he got. So he got it. So I know it wasn't for nothing, but it was a long period of just kind of chaos and not really knowing what we were going to do with the band.
The person was Russell Crowe in the movie A Beautiful Mind.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's great. To me, it seemed like it would have been something super challenging and, but it helped you grow as a musician. So that's really cool.
Same vibe for Thorn when we get to that one.
Yes. Okay. So next is Ashes. So I wanted to kind of read something to you guys. kind of embarrassing, but also not. So you know that I have a music site that I've had for a long time. And
Shout out Promising Chord.
Thank you. I wrote about you guys several times. So when Ashes came out, that's when I first started listening to you guys. And of course, I went back and listened to the back catalog. But I wrote a review of Ashes, but I never published it. But I found it because I was able to pull a bunch of my old posts because my website has been hacked, and so I lost a lot of my my content. But I found this review that I wanted to read a little bit about it.
Very excited for this.
Okay, so Ashes is a 4-song EP that feels more like a full length, with the shortest song being 7 minutes and the longest being a towering 9.5 minutes. The length lets the music flow and transition throughout beautifully. Each song is forceful and gut-wrenching, filled with screeching guitars and vigorous drum patterns. The lyrics may be hard to understand, but they're not just verses. They're more like devout words. That's kind of how I feel about the way that y'all write lyrics. So I also noted that in a recent interview, not recent because this was 2012, I think it was with Creative Loafing. So I couldn't find the actual interview, but one of you guys stated that listening to music in a casual way is fine, but there are others who want to obsess over the nuances of each guitar part, what each sample comes from, how each part fits together, and find the connections to other albums that came before it. So that's who you're making music for. So I said I completely relate to this because I don't consider myself a casual listener. I want to understand on a personal level why the music was created and how it was created. That connection helps me to relate to the music, which we've kind of already discussed. Ashes is demanding and forces the listener to feel, whether it be complete extremes of rage or happiness. And even though Ashes weighs like a ton of bricks on my heart, it really does make me overwhelmingly happy. So that's how I felt about Ashes when it was released.
That's cool. I love that.
And it's very interesting, just a side note, that I never posted it because I think I was kind of self-conscious about my writing. Mm-hmm. But then reading this now and looking back,
should have put that shit up.
Yeah, I'm like, this is exactly, I feel like it represents, like what somebody listening to the EP feels. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned we always had these definitions for ourselves, which we realized were outside of the regular musical bounds of our EPs were 30 minutes, and then if we did an album, it was always a double LP hour long, which we haven't done one since Light. But regardless, I guess the last one was supposed to be a full length. But yeah, I think that it was a very emotional time when we were writing all of that.
Yeah, that was the reforming of the band, because we made Light, but I remember me, JJ, Zach, and Spencer in a room where JJ's like, hey, I need to tell you guys, I'm going to go marry the mother of my child and start my life with my family forever. Mm-hmm. We cried. It was holy shit, this is harsh, and we're separating. He went and did his thing. We're all happy for him. We love JJ, but it kind of felt okay, now he's gone, the band's over. And that was, that lingered for long enough for us to start other random bands, and just sometimes we would just make a little track and put it out for some fun reason. And somewhere in this, maelstrom of confusion and bands doing different things. I was in an electronic band with Zach and Spencer. Spencer was in this band, Knock, that became Big Jesus.
Mm-hmm. With Zach, and then not with Zach at some point or maybe they were together, but there was some tension in our band where Zach thought, he used this phrase seriously and jokingly, I've dedicated my life to this band we're in, but Spencer was in other bands, and it was kind of well, I'm mad about this. I didn't like it either. And I didn't want, I wanted our band to have all the attention, but I was butthurt Spencer did other stuff. And I remember going to Gato Bisco in Candler Park with Brandon Boyle. We got
breakfast, and he taught me this breakfast that he gets. It's a burger on a biscuit with a side of gravy, and I get 2 or 3 eggs with that. So we're like eating our heavy gato breakfast. I was like, man, I'm just like bummed that, we can't really get our band going because Spencer's got other bands, and I can't just say don't play in your band, Spencer, but I don't know what to do. He's like, why don't you just start another band, man? I was like, I don't have any people to play with. We all live together here, and I'm playing with the people I live with. He's like, what about Irreversible? I was like, no, we can't do that. And at the same time, years have passed between like releasing Light and 2012 when we finally got Ashes and stuff together. But I'm thinking like, oh, but it's not the band without JJ still. And I had to like adjust to that not being true. It's dark shit. Like I don't like that feeling. But I had to like accept like, okay, the person I like have a tattoo with that I wrote all this important music with isn't around. So like the band that reformed was Billy, me, and Zach, just as a 3-piece. And we made Ashes. And it's very DIY. It's probably the most DIY recording we have. I think Matt Washburn only did the drums.
Yeah. Did we just go up and just do drums?
Yeah. I mean, I was like
we split a session. Remember, Isness recorded too.
Yes. Yeah. I was really broke, and like I recorded all the guitars and bass and vocals and samples. Like only the drums were done with Matt. So we put it together, and it doesn't sound very clear. I tried to put out another like remixed, remastered version later. That's a little better.
I was going to ask about
it's a little more clear, but that's a very DIY record. So the fact that anyone can hear it and like get it or be excited about it is cool.
It's great.
But I think again, it was just like, that was the time we were living at the lake. Well, we weren't living at the land trust, but we were living in like a communal living situation in Lake Claire, like very hippie dirt floors, like different people of varying levels of drug addiction drifting in and out of the space.
Transients.
So yeah, we were like, that really represented what we were going through and how we were feeling at the time, I think. And I still always think about, the cover art was shot by our friend Daniel Riley, who was in Instilled and then did all the vocals on Thorn with us. Just like that piece of trash on the barbed wire right at the top of DeKalb Ave.
Yeah.
And then we did that promo pic, which the 3 of us in the back behind the house.
Yeah,
where it was like
just standing in the mud.
We had the fucking, that hut being constructed.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was the vibe.
Yeah, we lived together in squalor.
Plucked Up by the Root, Xanthosis, the stage and the alchemical I should have looked it up while I had that phone. But
did you know about the one that I mentioned?
No, I've never heard of that. No.
Yeah.
So interesting note. But yeah, that record is like one of my favorites. First of all, we have to acknowledge, we'll never forget your review of the show, because it was like, oh, that is the order. Then it's Plucked Up by the Root and then Thorn. We, at the time, Russ Abbott he definitely tattooed me, Zach, and Jackob. So we were friends with him, and we were hanging out with him a lot at the time, and he had just gotten into playing guitar. And he invited me and Jackob up to his house and like just hung out, went and got lunch, and like he showed us some riffs he'd been working on. We're like, oh, these are cool. So the idea from there was he came over one day to where we were living, and Jackob tracked him, and we just recorded him playing a bunch of stuff on lap steel banjo and guitar. And then we built the album around those samples from there. And it was me kind of guiding the path, and Jackob was executing everything. And I think that was like some of my most favorite stuff of us writing together. Yeah. We had built a structure that he was living in, and we would just both come home from work every night. We spent like a month writing it. And remember there's even parts where like I was like, the bass line needs to be like this. And I just hummed it to him, and he went in and programmed all of it. So the other fun part about that is like we were constructing Thorn and Plucked Up at the Root by the same time, obviously both very different. So Zach didn't really know the songs at all. I don't think he heard them until like 2 days before we went to the studio. So we had never heard him play along with them. And there was a little bit of like strife there. I remember it was like, what's he going to do when we get in the studio? And I remember I was like so nervous that he was going to like come in and try and blast beat over everything. And he just fucking nailed it. I remember sitting there and just being like so stoked.
He got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's like one of my favorite records. And again, I think that one is like in the super cinematic of our releases, and like really stretched that one out and made it into a whole experience. And I remember at the time I was very concerned because I know specifically Dead in the Dirt was like a really big band at the time, and everybody loved them. They had signed to Southern Lord. And I was like, no one's going to give a shit about this slow, weird, when we put it out, it was only one song actually too. I remember we did that because we, at Bandcamp, you could only have like one free or streaming album at the time. So we used SoundCloud and put up a single track that was 30 minutes long. And I was like, absolutely nobody's going to give a shit about this. And I think at the time we got a much warmer reception because I don't think people wanted to hear us play thrashy beat shit.
So Thorn obviously is completely different. What I noted was that from the get-go it's heavy and thrashy, and I think you mentioned like, you know, punk kind of influence. So it makes sense to be like a completely, you know, separate release, obviously. This to me it felt more of like a traditional release. I don't know if that makes sense, but less of like a cinematic kind of experience. Would you agree? And
okay, I'm remembering the whole thing now. That was the point. Is so Ashes is like this blackening, and it's the burning of
Negredo.
Yeah, the prime material, and then so that was the idea. Next was like you've taken whatever your material is and you burn it down to its essence, and then you distill it into these two separate things. So that was the idea. There was like
perfect. Yeah.
Plucked Up by the Root was like all of the ambient melodic sections, and then we just took all of the other most disgusting parts and put them over here.
Yeah.
But tell the backstory
about how it was written.
About why.
So there's like a thematic story about working with Daniel and the lyrics and everything. Then there's how the music got that way. People have given this album reviews where they'll say like, this doesn't sound like them. Why is it so upbeat? It doesn't sound like Irreversible that I want to hear. And the only response to that is like, you had to be there for what was going on, because we grew up in hardcore punk for 5 years or so, going to shows. And there's like an old video from 2004 where Instilled and Daniel is singing for Instilled, and I sing, and Billy sings at different times. Like, we cared about this music and this band, and Daniel is a person. Like, we've always loved Daniel. But I had a tenant living on this like commune property Billy mentioned, and he was from Iowa. He played bass, like a nu metal dude. We called him Nu Metal Matt, I think it was. Yes. He's got the kind of weird like flame-looking goatee thing. And he comes up to me one day. He's like, "Hey, you're a musician, right?" I said, "Yeah." He's like, "Do you know how to like transcribe things?" I said, "Well, I have a webcam. Like, I can make videos. What do you want to learn?" He said, "The bass player of Slipknot, Paul Gray, has just died, and they're trying to find new bass players. So we need, I need to learn these songs, and I can't like read this book. What is all this music?" It wasn't even sheet music. It was like tablature with accents and weird stuff. He's like, "Will you just make me these videos? I'll give you like tickets the next time they come and $100. And I'm like, "I'll do anything for $100. So give me that." And I go in my little like cabin that I built, and I'm like in there for days or weeks, just going like on this 5-string bass that Corey let me borrow. And I don't know how I thought like, okay, we'll turn this into the album, but Plucked Up by the Root is the soft thing. And then like the heavy thing is just all this down-tuned fast shit that could be somewhere between like punk or Slipknot shit.
The pieces that like, you fucking like your left bicep was huge from playing all of these things as fast as you could. And you're just like, okay, I can just play really good now. Like, we've got to do an album.
And then, and we recruited Justin Brush to play guitar. He's got, he'd played with us before. He's got metal experience. And I accepted this role of not trying to write songs anymore. I just wanted to make these raw riffs. Like, just listen to this thing. And he's like, okay, do like 4 or 6 of those, break it up with this thing, and then we'll transition to that other weird thing you showed me that I gave this weird name to. And he would help me like assemble these things, and then Zach would tell us if that was good or not and kind of direct us in the practice space for what to do. But yeah, all that weird, I lived with this guy and he wanted to replace the bass player of Slipknot, and I taught him these things. It just infected me with all this weird, heavy nu metal shit.
Also, we loved Slipknot.
Oh yeah.
We both grew up fucking like, I had a fucking notebook where I like printed out bios from each member on a fan site and had them in like plastic fucking protectors. Just like, it was my Slipknot Bible.
Yeah. But that we wrote the lyrics with Daniel. Like, it was a cool privilege just to sit down with him and drink and get high and be like, what do we hate? I hate when people do this. And like, here's a song. I hate this. And here's another song.
Yeah. And again, we also like the punk influence was there, and it was just like, we saw a Blue Cross Blue Shield commercial. So I was like, Black Cross Black Shield, we're writing a song about fucking healthcare.
Yeah. Or lack thereof or whatever.
Yeah. So again, it was just like, we always liked to give ourselves like assignments. And like, that was how we like found a lot of like good ways to channel our creativity. It was like, this is the prompt. Like, A Sun Dies Every Second was like, we're writing a pro-abortion song.
Yeah, and there's sample. I mean, there are no more unhinged samples than on that record. Like there's
Alex Jones.
Yeah, people. Glenn Beck's crying on there, and there's some weird. It's the close. I feel like that was the only time it was appropriate to get close-ish to political subjects from a kind of druggy, still philosophical place, is because it was that raw and it wasn't overproduced and oversampled. It just had like in-your-face stuff. So
I feel like a big influence on that one was like we both love catharsis. Like, as far as like punk, political, hardcore, beat shit. Again, just like that kind of crusty, disgusting element. Yeah. And it was like where we were living at the time. So yeah, a perfect confluence of trash.
Yeah, just grimy.
I think it's good. I think it was a great release.
I think another thing too is like I always wanted us to be like Boris. Like we always loved Boris, and like I thought it was always so cool. They collaborated with so many people, and they had so many just distinct sounds, and they were so willing to jump across genres and be like, okay, here's a fucking album of like shit that sounds like Motorhead. And like our next album is just going to be like all feedback sludge. So I think that was like something I always found aspirational, especially in the metal genre, which is usually a little bit more strict about that type of thing.
All right. So moving on to Surface. What I noted, this is a full length consisting of only 3 songs, no shorter than 12 minutes. It gets us back to the moving arrangements that evoke emotion. Even though that's easy to see, this is, your strong suit. I feel like every release is unique. So what can you tell me about Surface? How did it come about?
I remember starting it. We just started with the first song. Deep Loving Injury was the first thing we wrote. And I remember you just had that little, I would say this was like one of our most emo riffs, is the opening of this album. And again, just a really great song. That one was like a really big build. I remember that was like, I feel like some of the most patient we've ever been in songwriting. We really took a second to like open that up. I remember very excited at the time we were watching True Detective, like as it was happening. We had like the first project where we were writing that, and it was like only the first 2 episodes were maybe out. I was like, we're definitely sampling this. And just jammed it in there right away. I think like you had said too, that was when we had moved out of the land trust and we were all kind of in our own separate spaces for the first time, and like back at Thunderbox practicing and like having that as a kind of place to go and really like put energy into it. I think that's maybe why this one is very back to, like you said, is the very cinematic moving pieces. I also remember specifically at the time I was really into Madonna. Take a Bow, that song, I was like listening to it all the time, and I remember I was like getting really into it, reading about it on Wikipedia, and they mentioned that it used this like Japanese scale. And I was like super obsessed with it. And at the time, Jackob also, and this is how a lot of things get used, he had this thing that he was just playing constantly, this loop that he'd made. And I was like, hey, have you ever heard of this scale? It kind of sounds like this. And I remember he got so mad. He's like, God damn it. It's exactly what you're talking about. This thing that I've made. It's the closing, the tea house. Yeah. The closing of. I
don't remember the name of it. It's a Japanese word.
Yeah. Hiroke or something like that. But yeah, that's one of my favorite moments from that. It's a super ambient moment, sampling David Lynch, Inland Empire there. But yeah, again, I was super proud of that record as we wrote it and put it out. Ryan Visions, the famed photographer, shot the cover for us. Again, we always tried to work with people we knew. He lived at that same communal space as us. So that's how we knew him. And he had already shot the cover, and it's down right by Georgia State. I can't remember the name of the park. It's a little public park down there. And I just thought it was super great because it had those 3 textures of the waterfall. And I feel like it really went well with the tracks. Yeah. And again, I think I don't know how those songs ended up being so goddamn long. We didn't really sit down and say, but
I think every record is like a lesson / reaction to the previous release. And when you hear Puppeteer and Thorn, you're like, okay, here's what worked and didn't. And like he said, we moved out and kind of started our separate lives. I met my wife and we moved in together right away. And we came to the space to work on things. And we were also coming out of this valley of automation where when we were a 3-piece, it was me playing guitar. My bass was tracked on like a laptop. He would trigger with a click that Zach could sync up to, and he could play samples over that. So we were like very tightly coupled to that. Even playing with Russ, we had that thing where there wasn't like a 5-piece band playing. There's like, a quarter of the sounds are just coming from what we pre-recorded. So Surface, we got back into, okay, let's get like David back on bass, and Justin was playing guitar. And then eventually Kevin took his place on that record right around when we recorded it.
I think you recorded everything.
I did, but yeah, then when we played it live, someone else would.
Show Kevin
so that's when we re-expanded back to being a full band with less automation, and we wrote patiently and carefully, and didn't have like this. Let's get out a new record now. It was more like, let's make it good. That's what makes things last. They have to be good and like reproducible. And you want to have the same good experience.
I think like you said too, there was like that patience. Again, we had the space. It was a place to go and like be in that mode, and we were very focused, and we would go smoke our cigarettes out in the parking lot during our breaks and then come back, and we were just super productive then.
Yeah.
And that was away from automation and back to more, we had all this foam insulating to, reverberate the sound. And we were just constantly drawing all over that and writing out the riffs and like mapping things and crossing them out and retitling and sub-numbering sections of songs.
That sounds like me scribbling the light geometry on the board, but this had a purpose. Everyone had input, and it wasn't just some unhinged, useless lunacy. So.
All right. So we've made it to the quote unquote end. For the self-titled album. I wasn't ready for it to be a finale. And, what I noticed in it was it features samples from movies in every other track. Obviously, that had to be intentional. Particularly, I wanted to know the ending of the album. We can talk about the other samples, but, the last sample, a clip from a documentary about the failed movie adaptation of Dune, which, it seemed like so well thought out. So all good things come to an end. You want to share kind of why that was the end of Irreversible at the time?
At the time, like Jacob had said, we'd all kind of started moving as Surface was happening into these other phases of our lives. When that album came out, was at the job that I'm still at now, and Jacob was getting ready to move. So I think kind of the opposite of what we just described for Surface was this one had like a really compressed timeline, and we knew that we had to accomplish all these tasks by then. There's things I absolutely love about that record. It was definitely rushed though, and wasn't our most cohesive. But I do love that sample. Jodorowsky's Dune, huge fan. We're both huge fans of his work. El Topo, Holy Mountain. I love all of his comics as well. Was just really obsessed with him at the time. And I think, on the last album on Surface, we sampled Trash Humpers, Harmony Korine. I think it was just like people like those ethos that we really line up with. And again, maybe less so Jodorowsky, but like the Trash Humpers one is just like kind of a demented film that had this genius piece in it. And again, I thought that was a kernel of gold from Jodorowsky, just about art and why to make it, and something that we just totally aligned with. And kind of at the time as a last send off, I thought a good message. That last track was cool and fun too. It was again made super weird. I was working on it, and I asked Jacob what the chords were for the last track before it, and he just sent me this cell phone video of him playing them. And then
acoustic.
Against his better wishes, I used those in the song, and like just my classic way of like, I kind of pasted them in the wrong order, but they still sound cool that way. So we went with it.
I like that Jodorowsky quote. Is it just at the end? It belongs at the end.
Yeah.
Yes. We tried to squeeze in stuff to that record, like realizing that, I'm really moving like way far away and not coming back for I don't know how long. And we made a record that has like, okay, what didn't we get to do here? I wanted a 5/4 part that's like in the first track. Then there's a really pretty thing. And Kevin is he's got a great tone and is a great writer. So he brought all these cool riffs to the table, cool tunings and things that we hadn't done before.
I Heart Huckabees, like such an example of like, we just loved I Heart Huckabees. Like we need another sample. Like, okay, we've somehow never sampled this. So like, let's just toss that in there too.
Yeah. I think we abandoned is it in the public domain thing? We're like, no, we're in Indigo. No one cares.
Long ago.
Yeah. So we put that together, and like the Jodorowsky thing, I think he's talking about how like you can make, he's talking about a movie in particular, but it's like movies have heart and have power, but like everything that has to do with money is fake. Life being fake is a big theme of the band, I think. Like, like I just think of everything as fake still. I think of like money, jobs, the economy, politics, TV, media, everything is just a lie and fake and stupid.
Yeah, again, that's just like, I remember like the very first mushroom trip I had, I just like had this whole breakdown where I was like, what do people do? And it's just like, that's kind of one of those things that's stuck with us.
Yeah, because you have to, you can't just like argue to convince someone that here's the facts they pay attention to versus these. You have to just like retreat from all that noise and make something. And if it's cool, people will like it and check it out and talk about it. And that's interesting. Like that's an interesting way to live, I think.
Yeah. Very cool. So what is next? Obviously we had the album release and the show announcement opening for Godflesh at Terminal West on July 1st. What should we expect next? Is there going to be more music, more shows?
TBD. You know, the past year was like a lot of mental, emotional energy for me to get the release ready, working with Kevin and, you know, getting all of our shit together. And then literally right as that was ending, I was like, fuck, the finish line's here. We've got all the stuff in, we've got all the orders in, and then we got offered the show. So yeah, we're just kind of like focusing on that and working hard. You know, we're just playing all songs from Sins. So
Nice.
we want to represent ourselves in the record well. We're not trying, you know, Johnny Dang from Oh Brother, very longtime friend of ours. I think we've known him both since we were like 15 years old, going to shows. He was in Big Jesus with Zach at one point. So really excited to have him bring some energy. We're not trying to like totally replicate the Sins sound, but we want to represent the music and kind of thank the people who have supported it for this long and been this patient. So I think, we're cautiously optimistic. You know, we've kind of talked about like we have this idea box that we pull from. Like we've been doing albums, and for better or worse, we've started a new idea box. So we'll see where that goes after this show. But yeah, we want to feel it out and see what feels good. And you know, we've always just kind of let a certain artistic intuition run the band for us without putting a lot of our own external thoughts onto it. So
that's a big part of featuring other people too, just to do random things. It's not the people are not as relevant as like the content. So you try to just make the people as like transparent as possible because the music is kind of its own thing. But I think if I want to go and do something that we're proud of, I'm already really happy with how we're playing together with Johnny. I tried to get him in my other band, Initium. So now like getting him to play here is good. But I'm like interested in like hearing what it sounds like and seeing how it goes. I've always loved Godflesh as long as I've known who they were. So it's a really big honor. Again, Brandon, thank you. And I think once we finish that show, we'll have some like thoughts about how did it feel to play together. And if that's enough energy, I think we'll try to keep it lit and keep it kindled and make new stuff. We all have busy lives now. We're like a lot older than we were when we were just doing nothing but music. But it's a great hobby and great thing to put time into. It's still important to me.
Yeah, I think to exactly what you're saying is like we're all busier, but we also have better resources and we know what we want to do and how to do it. So we can be more methodical in how we do it. And especially, you know, CJ's been so gracious to let us practice here and he's got a whole studio down there. So we're excited for the future for sure.
Yeah. I'm excited too. I already have a ticket for the show, obviously. All right. Well, I think that wraps it up. You know, I appreciate you guys.
Thank you so
being
much.
Open to my questions and thoughts. Anything else that you wanted to add?
Thank you.
Yeah.
We appreciate the passion that you have for the band. It's one of those things that makes doing it all worth it is people getting it and caring. So thank you. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Kevin at Dipterid. Thanks to the other dudes, CJ, Zach, Johnny. We're excited to see everybody in July.
Yes, it'll be great.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Clint.
Thank you, Clint. Yeah.